All right, Rabbi.
Okay, hello everybody. This is going to be an experiment because Rabbi Silfen is not around and we're trying to do this remotely. So we are again towards the end of Perek Gimel, where he's trying to explain how everybody's capable of really being a good religious Jew, meaning fulfilling every single mitzvah and abstaining from every sin. How is that possible when we all have an animal soul which works against our trying to connect ourselves to Hashem? So he started saying every Jew has a godly soul, which is part of godliness itself. In third chapter, he starts saying what are the components of the godly soul. He calls them spheres, or he calls them the different levels of the soul. There's 3 intellectual levels, Chochmah, Bin, and Das, and 7 emotional components. He explained what exactly is the first component of Chochmah, the flash of inspiration or conceptualization of an idea. Bina is taking this idea, which is so far quite nebulous, and expanding it, understanding all of the ramifications, as he says, in its depth and its length and its breadth in every way possible. So far, he leaves out the third one, Das. And then he says, what are the other emotional components? When it's brought down to a person, it means creating a palpable, powerful love for God and a palpable, powerful fear and dread of God, not fear of punishment, but fear and awe of the greatness of God. So let's go back to some of the words. Let's see which line we'll start with.
I'm going to have to do it. Tell me where to go.
Start Noila V'Nisayrira.
Here it is.
Okay. So again, after he contemplates these 3 aspects of godliness, the level of godliness that literally gives life and function to every specific world and every specific being. The level of godliness that gives a general life, that gives creation to everything, which is called Seiviv. The first level is called Memale, which means literally it fills it. That the function that it's supposed to create feels its ability to function and it feels its sense of empowerment. And then there's the third level of godliness that's way beyond, because both of those 2 levels of godliness somehow are a lower level of godliness that is related to this world, because it's meant to somehow, to some degree at least, interact, and it is geared for this world. But then you have the level of godliness, which is called Kula Kamek Lachoshev. Everything is really nothing in comparison to godliness itself, because in godliness itself, the essence of godliness is way above this idea of creating anything that appears to be a separate entity, even though it isn't. And I have to apologize. From Tisha B'Av, when I fasted, I lost my voice completely, and it's very, very difficult to speak. So I'm sorry. So those are the two emotions that are created. First, a passionate love for God by contemplating God, and then he continues, Pachat Hashem B'Libay, a great fear, or literalist Beishesh, to be embarrassed, meaning of the greatness of Hashem, She'ein lo sefer tachlis, that is infinite, Upachat Hashem B'Libay, and he will develop a dread, a feeling of awesome fear of the magnitude and holiness of God itself. Okay. Then what follows after that is going to be this passionate love, the shuv. Following this, he is lahev liboy, the person's heart, his soul, the nefesh alikis, meaning the aspect of love, the emotion of love in his heart, will become literally impassioned, inflamed. The ava aza, an intense love, kirishbe esh, like a flaming fire, a strong, passionate fire. The chasheka, with a passion, chafetza, a desire, shuka, a longing, nefesh keika, a yearning soul. These are different levels of passion in different levels of the soul. And this passionate love is to what? Ligdulas Ein Sof, to this greatness of the infinite God, Baruch Hu, blessed be He. When he realizes how amazing God is, he just wants to become one to an extreme degree with what he realizes is his source of life. The fact that he's in existence is completely owed to this level of Ein Sof. It's owed to the lower levels of godliness also, but those lower levels stem from the infinite God. Take that away, he is not here in any way whatsoever. And so he's going to have a passionate love, first of all, as he explains later in Tanya, because this is his source. And even more so, he'll have a passionate love for God because that is his Father, that is his everything. And now he says this passion that is so strong that he literally wants to give up his very being to merge with the source of his life, even though when he merges with the source of his life, he will not be an entity whatsoever. Using the example that we said in the previous lessons, that you have the sun and you have the rays of the sun. Now, the rays of the sun come completely from the sun. You take away the sun itself, the rays are non-existent. And in the sun itself, we must say that somehow the rays are there, but they're completely not evident, because in the sun, all you would see is sun. The rays are somehow there, but the rays are completely nullified in the sun itself. And yet, the person, the soul of the person within God itself, he's a complete non-entity. And yet, the person realizing that God is the complete source of his life and the magnitude of what God is, and God is everything, would want to expire completely in his source. The he and this feeling of wanting, so to speak, to completely expire, become one with something that he is so passionately in love with and has such a great awe for, meaning godliness, is what's called kalois hanefesh, a consuming passion of the soul. Where do we find any place in actual written Torah this concept? So it's not something that Kabbalah makes up, but kediksiv, as it says, it's written in a verse. It's in the Psalms. Nichsefa v'gam kolsa nafshi. David HaMelech said, "My soul longs for you," and v'gam kolsa, in fact, it is expiring. He uses the word, it feels faint. In other words, it is going out of its limitation of being able to be contained in the human body. As we gave the example, when you had the Beatles, Lahavdil, first come to town, and they first performed on, I said it last week, the show, the Art Linkletter show, I think it was, you had the girls fainting away. The same thing was by Elvis Presley. In other words, the passion was too much for the person to be able to contain the emotion. This same thing, of course, on a way higher level, is found in the soul of a Jew who has this love for God, but through this meditation, continuous and constant meditation, it becomes a reality to feel to him that he feels this passionate love. Literally, he wants to expire from being a limited soul in a limited human body and be released from his limitation. Now he brings another verse that says the same idea. Uksiv, Sama nafshi lelekim, my soul thirsts for God. Meaning, as it says in a different verse, like a person who finds himself the Eretz Tzia Oyev in a desolate, dry desert, he'll do anything. He's going to give up everything for a glass of water at that time. His soul is consumed with living, and his life now depends on this glass of water. The same way the person who, through meditation, comes to realize how God is everything, he literally wants to expire and wants the source of life, godliness. Uksiv, there's another verse that says the same idea. Soma lecho nafshi, my soul is thirsting for you. In other words, it is the soul. It is not a thirst of the body. It is the thirst of the nefesh, the soul, that it's longing for God and to be connected to God is so strong and passionate. It is likened to a human being who is completely parched and he's dying. He must have a glass of water. The same way the spiritual soul feels this thirst that it must be connected to godliness. So these are the different passions that are created from the nefesh alikis, from the godly soul, from the love of God, and from the fear of God. And these two emotions, as they come down, the chachma and the bina, the wisdom, or the first flash of inspiration and the wisdom expanding, that we understand what exactly God is, at least to the extent that a human being is capable of understanding this with his limited understanding, which can never fully, of course, understand godliness whatsoever. But that limited understanding can lead him to an intense love, an intense awe, to the point that he literally thirsts for God and he wants to expire in what they call the Godhead, which I hate that expression, in the source of his life, in the source of godliness. Okay, so he finished explaining that. But now the Alter Rebbe wants to explain something, and I believe this is really, I didn't see it anyplace, but I think logically, this is what the Alter Rebbe wants to do now. We are speaking of the soul, that the soul has this passionate love for God, and the soul has this passionate awe of God. The soul is the spiritual entity, right? It's completely spiritual. So why am I suddenly starting to attribute to God, to my soul, this spiritual entity of mine, terms that belong to a physical human being? The idea of this thirst, the idea of this longing, which I associate with a human being. Certainly this passion of a thirst, that is a physical concept. How am I relating this physical concept to a spiritual soul? So this is what the Alter Rebbe wants to explain now. And to explain this, if you remember in the first chapter, he said that there are 4 elements in creation: Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar. Fire, wind or spirit, Eish, Ruach, water, and soil. And these 4 elements become the building blocks, the components of everything. Everything includes the spiritual world also. The spiritual world also has these 4 attributes of Eish, fire, Ruach, spirit or wind, Mayim, water, and Afar. How am I going to apply physical components of fire, water, air, and soil to a spiritual thing? It means to say that this analogous to what the physical components create, in the spiritual world, you have something similar. It is not on a physical level, but on a spiritual level. Just like we said in the first chapter, the different passions of the animal soul, and they're also passions, come from the different elements of the spirit of the animal soul, which are also spiritual elements, but yet you have the idea of mayim, which creates desire. So even though it's not a physical water, what water creates, this idea of pleasure and desire, is also found in the spiritual animal soul. Fire, the passion for sin, is found in the animal soul. The same thing, a slothness, a laziness, is found in the animal soul. And the idea of, Eish Ruach Mayim and Afar, the idea of the frivolity, the idea of taking things insincerely and lightly, is the idea of Ruach. So you have a spiritual component in the animal soul. The same way in the godly soul, which is also comprised of these four elements of Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar, in its spiritual counterpart, something which is similar in result of these four physical elements, but in a spiritual level, are found in the godly soul also, just like they are found, as we said before, in the animal soul. And now he's going to start bringing from Kabbalah, and he's going to start bringing what he calls natural science, that also affirms the same idea, that in the heart, the passion that the heart feels, the element comes from the element of fire. Now, they don't put it in the same terms as Kabbalah that says everything comes from these four elements. But even the naturalists confirm that the idea of passion, of being inflamed for something, what is the source of that feeling? Even though we might think it comes from our mind, it might originate in the mind, in the sense that the mind tells me this is something that I should desire intensely. This is something good that I should want to connect myself to. But where does the actual feeling of passion come from? It comes from the heart. Now, the idea, the mind itself, which is called always cool and calculating, the mind itself is dispassionate. The mind itself looks for truth. The mind itself doesn't look for result of its analysis. It looks for the analysis. So somebody can analyze something, and if he doesn't allow it to penetrate into his bina, understand the ramifications, and so it will never create by him a passion. You can have a scientist who's working on some type of a virus. Now, his goal might be how to eliminate the virus. And he comes up with the idea of a virus after working for months and years. Now, the virus that he just created can kill millions of people. He has no feeling of remorse of what the virus might do, because he doesn't think of the virus in that term. He's thinking of the virus in the term that he's going to produce a cure from the virus for its deadly effect. So he's not even excited about the effect of the virus. His excitement is going to come from the effect, his knowledge produced something. As far as the effect of what he produced, that is not part of the mind's calculation. The mind itself is calm and aloof. So that's what he says in the next line. But let's go back one line, that it's what's written from the Tivium, the scientist, V'chein Beitz Chaim. It is also brought down in the Sefer called Beitz Chaim, a Kabbalistic primer, so to speak, that both of them say that she is Soita Eish, the source of fire, meaning the source of a passionate feeling, who believe it rises up from the heart. The mind might generate a passion in the heart, but he has to think of it first in his mind. But when it descends to the heart, he'll have this passion. Umikor hamayim, and the source of the intellectual water, valechos, and the moisture comes me'amayach from the mind, that is cool and dispassionate. And then he brings down another source, as he brings down also in the Sefer called Eitz Chaim, a Kabbalistic Sefer, Kabbalistic book, Portal 50, chapter 50, Shebchinas Chochma, Shenikramayim, Shebenefesh Elikis. Where's the water in the Nefesh Elikis? As we said before, the godly soul is spiritual. How do you have water there? How do you have this idea of mayim in the brain, in the intellect? So he says the level of wisdom is called mayim. Mayim is what brings forth all types of growth. Whatever grows needs to have water. So the idea of water brings out something that was not there before. When I plant something, if you're not going to have water, you will have no growth. So water is the concept that's going to bring something out. So he says that the spiritual level of chachma, of wisdom in the soul, the source of it is the mayim, is water, because water contains the potential for creation, for coming up with something. So again, in these two places, he says that the idea of the moisture, so to speak, in the spiritual soul is the water. Let's continue. Hey, where did it go? Let me look in the Sefer here. Okay, so that is Umokar Hamayim, we just said that. Again, the words Ukumesh Kosa Beis Chaim, I don't see the lines here. Ukumesh Kosa Beis Chaim Sharnun, as it's written in the Sefer Eitz Chaim, the Kabbalistic word, chapter 50. Shebechinas Chochma Shenikaramayim, the level of Chochma, this first level, this flash of inspiration is called water within the godly soul. Again, because what it creates is something analogous to the creation of water. Okay, so over here we see that in the godly soul, in the nefesh olikis, in the godly soul, even though they're godly, we do have this idea of fire, we do have this idea of water, and therefore I'm able to say that there's this passionate thirst, which sounds to be a physical attribute, and I can attribute it to the spiritual soul, because in fact, those two components of the spiritual soul derive their quality from these two elements of fire and water, however, in a spiritual form. Okay, so over here, the Alter Rebbe concluded this chapter in which he's trying to explain how all of the emotion needed to fulfill the Torah and mitzvahs, to be completely, so to speak, passionately in love with God and passionately afraid or in awe of God, comes from the level of the godly soul. Contemplation, very, very strong contemplation, meditation of God. If somebody is so passionately in love and passionately in awe of God, then it becomes relatively easy and doable to fulfill every mitzvah and abstain from every aveda. Oh, we still have das. Oh boy. Forgot about this whole section. Okay. I think I'm going to have to leave this for next week. Over here, he's going to explain, just to give an introduction. He explained what is the idea of chachma, the initial conception of something, which is nebulous. Then there's the bina, that's chachma. Then there's the nebulousness, and then there is the bina, which is when I'm expanding and completely developing the thought, the flash of inspiration, that it should really be able to understand something fully. So I have these 2 points. I have the Chachma and then I have the Bina. So I fully understand the greatness of God. That, however, those 2 things on its own are not necessarily going to lead me to the state where I'm able to connect myself to God by doing the Torah and mitzvahs. Why? One thing is still missing. As we mentioned before, somebody who is working on the idea of creating a virus, if he is not going to think of what is the result of his action, or if somebody who, let's say a firebug, let's take it a little bit further, somebody who's a firebug, he likes to set homes on fire. He enjoys the scene of a fire, the action, the beauty of a fire. It is something amazing to behold. If he doesn't think into it deeply, what is the result of his action? He's going to do it again and again. If he's going to start connecting this thought to himself by doing what? He'll start imagining and start thinking deeply. The fire that looks so beautiful when it burns, and there's action, the fire companies come and firefighters climbing these big ladders. There might be people in the house. These people are, God forbid, going to die, or they're going to be burned. The relatives, the children of these people are going to be devastated. All of them are going to be in mourning. They're going to be crying. There can be animals over there that are going to be destroyed in terrible pain. If this person, this firebug, will start thinking of his actions as it relates to him as a human being, what are the feelings that I am causing? What is the pain that I am causing? What is going to be the outcome? Think of it as a human being. Think of it as if it would be affecting me. Then his actions are going to be way different. He's going to be thinking of his actions with the result of what he's thinking about doing. The same thing if you have a person. You can have people that they are very cold-blooded, and they might be designing clothes for most beautiful women. If they are a person that they're very cold-blooded, they can design the most beautiful clothes for the most beautiful women and will never affect them. If they're not affected with that emotion, it's not going to lead to a strong feeling, even though they know exactly what it's supposed to look like, and the person that they're creating it for, what it's supposed to look like, it has nothing to do with him. A person has to connect very strongly what he's thinking about and what he knows to himself. This level, which we call das, this level which is called a bond, it's a knowledge that he's binding to himself. He's taking the chachma, and he's taking the state of development, which is bina, and he's applying it to himself, that it becomes part of his reality. That is when he is able to derive and to create this passionate love and this passionate feeling, either for godliness or, on the other hand, for anything else that the animal soul wants. But there has to be this idea of connecting it to himself, to his world. It must become part of his reality. If it just remains an abstract thought, it's not going to affect him. It must become part of him. This is what he's going to explain to the ending of the chapter 3. What exactly is this level of das, which means knowledge, but at the same time, as he starts saying, it means connection, because it's not an abstract knowledge, but a knowledge that he applies and internalizes within himself to actually result in a passionate feeling, either love or hate, awe, fear, or passionate love. We will continue with this, God willing, next week. Okay, any questions? Yay. Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi Weinberg.
take care. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
So,
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.